Welcome to Energy Talks, a regular podcast series featuring expert discussions on power system testing, data management, cybersecurity, and important trends in the power industry. My name is Simon Rommer from the podcast team at OMICRON, and I will be your host. Hello everyone. As in all Energy Talks episodes that I host, I will be covering topics related to OT, cybersecurity in the power industry. In this episode, I will be speaking with my guests, Andreas Happe and Siegfried Hollerer. Andreas is a security researcher and PhD student at the TU Wien, and Siegfried is a security architect and analyst, as well as a NIST auditor at the Ministry of the Interior in Austria, and a lecturer at the University of Applied Sciences at St. Pölten. Together we are heading the open source project for OWASP OT Top 10. So without further delay, I welcome Andreas and Siegfried to this episode of Energy Talks. Hello Andreas, hello Siegfried.
Hi.
Thanks for having us.
Andreas, let's start with you. I have known you as my supervisor for my master thesis, but you're also a chapter lead in different OWASP chapters and had the initial idea of creating an OT Top 10. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what OWASP is and why you had the idea to create this list in the first place.
Of course, thank you. So OWASP is a global volunteer-driven nonprofit organization. It started out in 2001. Basically, initially it was focused on web security, but over the years it reached out towards mobile security, infrastructure security, and now also OT security. It's vendor neutral, free and open source, so everybody can access it. And originally, the name stood for the Open Web Application Security Project, but due to the impact of newer projects, it's now named the Open Worldwide Application Security Project. The basic idea for the OT Top 10 happened shortly before NIST became more relevant in the news. And I thought that a vendor-neutral way of capturing common vulnerabilities would be great to have. And that's when I started to reach out to you. I thought that OWASP, given its more or less non-profit, volunteer-driven approach, would be a good fit. And this is how the whole thing started.
And then we had some really deep discussions, you coming from the IT side as a former pen tester, me coming from the OT side as a former analyst. So we had very different views on some topics. That's why we also had to get some external views and had other people as well participating. And pretty soon we also had a lot of collaborators, mostly experts that we knew personally and from within Austria, but also from other countries like Germany and USA. So one of the early core contributors was Siegfried. Siegfried, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to work on the top 10?
Sure. I'm also one of the IT guys who extended their knowledge into OT, so coming from my IT world and then going afterwards to the OT world. I started my career as a penetration tester, focusing on web applications and later IT infrastructure, so it seems to be pretty similar that it is the case with Andreas. But then afterwards I continued as an ISMS consultant, auditing and certifying against the ISO 27001 standard to extend my technical IT security knowledge coming from the penetration testing point of view with organizational aspects. During this time, I also consulted clients operating OT systems where I got then in touch with the OT security challenges and OT security standards like the ISU 62443 family. Several years later, I additionally did a PhD focusing on OT security and its relations to safety from an academic and researching perspective, while still gathering practical experience in the industry. Then I continued my career at the Federal Ministry of the Interior in Austria to enforce the NIST, since we have a German national language, I'm pronouncing it like this, which is the national implementation, also an implementation of the European Union NIST directive that addresses mainly the national critical infrastructure, which mainly, again, consists of OT systems. Furthermore, I started to hold lectures and supervise bachelor and master theses at the University of Applied Sciences, St. Pölten. During this time frame, I got out of the blue an invitation from Andreas to contribute to the OT Top 10. Since then, I also joined OVE, since it's a national standardization committee, and SENELEC, which is an international standardization committee, developing the upcoming horizontal standard series, the EN 50770 family, as technical specification of the CRE, the Cyber Resilience Act.
So with you joining the OVE, which is basically the summary of all the electronical engineers in Austria, you're pretty deep inside the OT space already, because the OVE deals with the 62443 in Austria. So with that, you're more between us, so between me coming from the OT side and Andreas coming from the IT side. But we also had help from other guys like Felix Eberstaller, Nino Fürthauer and Sixtus Leonhardsberger. So special shout out to those three. They helped early on quite a lot with creating texts and proofreading what we fabricated, if it made sense. So with us coming from different backgrounds, but who is actually the target audience and what is the main takeaway and how is the list structured?
Yeah, the OT top 10 are intended for professionals involved in the operation development of OT systems. So this is our core audience, typically developers, integrators, operators. But during writing of the OT top 10, we found out that there are way more people involved and interested into this document. So we tried to create an easily accessible document, also suitable for development managers, asset owners, product owners, everybody who's involved with OT in the roughest sense. And this kind of also fits our idea of creating an awareness document that everybody should be able to read and get a better and deeper understanding of what's the vulnerabilities, what are the problems that come with an OT setup.
But not only the OT personnel, but also we aimed it at IT personnel that wanted to or have to work in the OT space to get a better understanding or a better overview of what is happening exactly or what the differences are. So the differences and maybe the glossary and so on is additional information besides the top 10. They can be found on the list, but what is other things that, for example, let's say I'm an IT person or I'm an OT person, what is other information besides the list of top 10 vulnerabilities that can be found on the website?
For me, coming from traditional IT security, very important additional information from the OT top 10 is the introduction to OT for IT security people, because it's a different world. As you mentioned, availability, safety is more important. And very often I see that IT security people don't really appreciate and see the problems that OT people are having, because just updating stuff is not a solution for many of those problems. So it was always an important part of OWASP to break up all of these information silos. And in that sense, for me, having a good introduction that tries to introduce OT to IT security, but also IT security to OT people, is quite important, and I'm quite proud of that part of the document.
Yes, just to add something here, of course, we have also the situation that OT people also have to get some security basic knowledge, because in the industry I also encountered often that if you are coming from a pure OT world, so to speak, you do not see updates at something. Additionally, a meet and greet section containing an overview and history of talks, introducing the OT top 10, including the used presentations, and where available recordings of the corresponding presentation is also available. So each and every time frame, it is possible for everyone to get the grasp and the idea of the OT top 10, and can also get some information about this, not just the list of the website, but also a presentation itself as well. The appendix section containing a glossary and a mapping table between relevant international standards and the OT top 10 is also available at our website.
So this is all fine and good, but what is actually the OT top 10 now? So we've talked about what is the OWASP, we've talked about who is our target audience and additional information, but what is actually the OT top 10? Andreas, you mentioned vulnerabilities. So we're talking about vulnerabilities, but last time we had a talk about software vulnerabilities. But today we are not talking about software vulnerabilities, but more like system vulnerabilities. So maybe let's take one item and give an example of the structure and maybe describe it a little.
When we started to write the individual top 10 items, we tried to take a very holistic approach, not only focusing on technology problems or technology questions, but also on organizational or awareness problems. And each of the top 10 items has exactly the same structure. So in the beginning, we always give a short paragraph, 2 to 3 sentences, to describe what the top 10 item is about. Then we also very often give a short introduction how one top 10 item relates to other top 10 items, because they're very interrelated. It's very hard to separate security into atomic items because we have connections between them.
And this is where we had the most discussions and are discussing still nowadays.
And we are still thinking about moving stuff between items, yes. But of course, it would be way easier if those were atomic items, but that's not how reality works. It's a part of reality, so we have to deal with it. Then we have a longer description for each item, and this description includes background information, everything you need to know about the vulnerability, about missing awareness, about shadow infrastructure, all that stuff. In addition, we have a rationale for each item. So during discussion, we found out that different people had different opinions why an item should be a top 10 item or not. And we found out, or we decided in the end, that the best way is to give all those voices place and describe the different opinions why an item is important or not. This is also really interesting because people can see why an item now is important.
And we also had the luxury problem that we didn't have to think about another item, we need to get the 10 full. We also in the beginning had a list of 12 or 13 items, I think. Then we combined the list to fit the 10 limitation. So that's why some of the titles like unknown assets and undocumented services is one item. So you see it's like unknown assets and undocumented services together from unknown things. So we really had to think about how to get our topics across in 10 distinct items.
I think this would be a good time to also thank all the contributors. We already mentioned some of them, but there were long and sometimes loud discussions about the importance of items. And the OT Top 10 wouldn't be here if we didn't have these discussions before, so I'm quite grateful for all of the contributors. Getting back to the contents of the top 10 items, each top 10 item also has a list of known attacks or example attacks, just to make them more realistic. And then we extended the list to not only include attacks and description what can go wrong, we also give a list of mitigations and countermeasures, because preventing harm is more important than just listing items.
In my opinion, the most important step is the next actionable steps, so that we give readers also some things that they can do, so that you're not only informed about the threats and then you're panicking, but you also keep calm, know what to do next to be able to be protected against these threats. And see, you provide a lot of references, so maybe we could talk about the reference table a little bit.
Sure. This was actually a very good linking point. In each of the OT Top 10 items, we have a small set of actionable steps actually, which gives you an idea in which direction you can proceed. And then afterwards, the mapping table that you just highlighted, Simon, here then has a more comprehensive framework, so to speak. So here, each of the OT Top 10 item in this mapping table is mapped to matching standard requirements with the aim to directly derive what security measures mitigate the risk discussed in the corresponding top 10 items. So the idea is that you have identified the risk yourself in your system, and then you are unsure what exactly you could do in this situation. And then you have, based on this link from the risk to the mapping table, then a pretty comprehensive list of security measures which you can then put into place in your OT system to protect against the corresponding risk. The standards chosen for this mapping include the whole IEC 62443 family, which is pretty well known and popular in the OT world. And here in the 62443 family, the whole standard series addresses the viewpoints of all stakeholder roles in the whole OT lifecycle, which includes the product developer, integrator, and operator or asset owner. Furthermore, the standard NIST Special Publication 800-82 is also considered here, so that we have another international standard we are taking into account here. And the frameworks, NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0, the newer version is considered here, which is mainly targeting IT, but in this framework, the abstraction level chosen is that high that the principles and the concepts can be directly also applied in OT. That's the reason why we also decided to include this here, although it's coming from an IT world. And the conceptual measures of the MITRE ATT&CK framework are also included here, which are also part of the OT Top 10 items, but here in the mapping table as well. And also the risk management measures based on the European Union NIST 2 implementing regulations are mapped and considered here. So it's a pretty comprehensive list again. There is an ongoing master thesis project focusing on evaluating the OT Top 10 itself. So if this grouping that we have chosen for the risks is valid or not, so to speak, and if it mirrors the current state of the art and its order from the top 10 items. So how critical and how severe we think it is also then evaluated from the external master student who is doing his master thesis in this topic.
So the broad range of the standards that we map is a testament to how broad we want to have our views. So if anybody of the listeners has another reference or another standard that they want to have mapped, maybe they can contribute. You mentioned also that the numbering or the hierarchy on the list is not set and it's already evaluated. What I have to mention is the first 4 items are equally important because we couldn't decide on a first, second, third, and fourth. And the other ones are ranked. So even within our top 10 list, we couldn't really decide. So we said, okay, first 4 are equally important, and that's that. Even though we are talking about the top 10 and the items, but the glossary and the mapping are a personal highlight of mine, because for me, not only once, but many times used it to look it up, some kind of relations that the standards have, and also that some certain vulnerabilities have. So we also provided the glossary that we already mentioned a few times for non-subject matter experts like OT people that are new to network security or IT security experts that are starting with OT, but also for everybody else who is interested in this topic. So maybe, Siegfried, you can talk about the glossary a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So the primary goal of the glossary is, of course, like it is with all other glossaries, that it has some frequently used terms in the OT security world. It may be extended in the future to serve as a more comprehensive source to ensure clarity and a common understanding of essential terms and concepts. But nevertheless, it should be used as a baseline so that everyone talks about the same thing and means the same thing, basically.
So the vocabulary in IT and vocabulary in OT, sometimes we talk about the same thing, but mean different things. So the glossary, for me, is a really important part to have the same language and know what we're talking about. So now we know what we're talking about. We now know how the top 10 items are constructed. We know what the OWASP is. But what is actually the topics that we're discussing?
So, as we mentioned, there are 10 items. The first 4 are equally important in importance, so we list them at the same position. These are mostly about unknown assets, about unmanaged access, devices with known vulnerabilities, supply chain problems, loss of availability. Nothing surprising to anybody working in either IT security or OT. The next 5 items are mostly about access control, detection capabilities, zone design, awareness, and very specific to OT components with insufficient security capabilities or legacy components, very specific to the OT world. And then as a final point, or as a final top 10 item, we have missing hardening. This was also a really big point of discussion because hardening itself might not be a vulnerability, but as it's so ubiquitous in the OT world, we believe that missing hardening has earned its top 10 spot so that people have more awareness about it.
I mean, you even see it in the 62443. There is security level capabilities for devices, and there is security level targets. And the difference is that a device can have the capability, but if it's not configured correctly, it's not part of the correct security level. So missing hardening is always a big thing with the default passwords.
If, as you see at the list of the top 10 items, many of them are not really OT specific. They're very security specific. That's also one of the reasons why we have the rationale for each item to show you why this item has another level of importance maybe in the OT world.
In addition to that, I would like to add that focusing on the OT domain, one of the most distinct topics here would be the topic of the supply chain management. Since in the OT world, it's, a little bit differently than in the IT, because you have much more complex and direct dependencies to your supplier than you have in the IT. And this is also considered here with this top 10 item. And also the loss of availability OT top 10 item, which also addresses to some extent safety, which is also a special characteristic at some OT systems, is also addressed and highlighted here. So it's not just security applied to OT, not only, but it also addresses these OT-specific characteristics and aspects that we discussed here.
Which doesn't mean that we are safe from IT attacks, because if you have a look at the inadequate supply chain management item, the second example is the CrowdStrike compromise, where CrowdStrike pushed a faulty update, which also impacted OT spaces where CrowdStrike was deployed. So IT supply chain management issues are also happening in OT, but not the other way around most of the times. We talked a lot about having discussions and being not on the same page for some points. And we're also looking always for different points of views. So I invite everybody who is listening to take part in the discussions. And even if you're not a security professional or if you are starting out, every viewpoint is valuable. So, for example, we have monthly video calls that are scheduled and available through ot.owasp.org, which is ot.owasp.org, where you can find how to contribute section. And this is also where you can find the GitHub section, how to push and pull and do everything GitHub is allowing you to, and contributing to the list.
Maybe we should mention that all development is out there in public and in the open. So the best way to contribute is to join one of those meetings and then create a GitHub pull request or work on a document, and we will review it afterwards.
If you are part of the industry and you want to contribute anonymously, we can also use the data that you want to provide and have it anonymized, so it doesn't really go back to your industry or to your company. For example, we are from OMICRON. We provided statistics that we based some of our decisions on. We also had some other companies that provided statistics. Some are anonymized, some are not anonymized. So if you want to contribute and don't want to be named, this is also an option. So I'm looking forward to many contributors and lots of interesting discussions. I always like to be proven wrong. It rarely happens, but I'm still happy if it happens. So if you want to contribute, I'm looking forward to a lot of interesting discussions and looking forward to meet you in those monthly meetings. And with that, thank you, Andreas and Siegfried, for talking to me. And a big thank you to our audience for listening to this and other episodes of Energy Talks. This episode was a little bit more informational since Andreas and Siegfried are friends of mine. I hope this change of pace is well received, and we always welcome your questions and feedback. Please send us an email to podcast@omicronenergy.com. OMICRON has several years of experience in power system testing, data management, and cybersecurity, and offers the matching solution for your application. For more information, visit our website at omicronenergy.com. Please join us for the next episode of Energy Talks. Goodbye for now, everyone.